So the Jumpstart servers are coming to Lost Ark, and so a lot of you might be jumping back into the game, or wanting to try the game out, or maybe looking to make a new character just to play, even if you're currently a Lost Ark player. And I wanted to make this video to go through some of my favorite classes and talk about what you might want to expect from those classes and how they might perform for you when you first start the Jumpstart servers, because it's a really exciting time. It's time to make a new character, and I think it's about due. You know, we're in the year 2023, and it's been a while since I've kind of like given people an overview for what these classes do. So I want to talk about some of my favorite classes that I like to play, and then give you my opinion on how they operate in kind of different stages of the game and how they practically end up playing, and give you that information. So let's jump into it. All right, let's start with the newest class first. Let's start with the Aeromancer. Aeromancer is a class that I've been really enjoying playing recently, and I think it's going to be a really, really good choice. Whether you play its Wind Fury engraving or its Drizzle engraving, each of the two class engravings that it can play, I think you're going to have a really good time playing this class. It's very easy to get like a well-rounded experience out of this class. They have good utility, they have good uptime, they have really good party synergy, and so I think you're going to find this class to be a really, really smooth experience if you're starting out playing the game. If you want more information for how to play the class or how to build the class, I would recommend you go to the community guides. I'll leave a link to that website in the description below so you can get information for what specific skills you should be taking and tripods and all the information like gems, everything you would need to know about skill points and stuff like that. All that stuff you're going to be able to find in the community guide. But for now, let's just take a brief look at the class. So in terms of playstyle, in the endgame or in raid scenarios, the Aeromancer is, one, going to be a class that is focused on uptime. Uptime and aggression are going to be your goals for success, okay? Now, it might be counterintuitive because I'm going to tell you right now, the ceiling, the highest achievable damage that Aeromancers can do, is not going to be the highest in the game, but rarely in Lost Ark are you going to get a situation where you can just do whatever you want and just do a perfect rotation on a boss. Usually you'll have to solve mechanics, you have to dodge moves, and you'll have to kind of deal with what the boss throws at you. The good thing about the Aeromancer is you're going to have the tools to be able to deal with those appropriately and keep uptime really, really high with good skills such as your big damage skill having a lot of range. It goes off screen, right? This is another big damage skill that you'll do, and it has a lot of range as well. This is another damage skill that you might use that has a very quick animation and good mobility on it. And so the Aeromancer really excels at maintaining uptime because a lot of her damaging skills can be utilized in different scenarios for range or animation or whatever it is to continue to hit the boss while you're dodging complicated mechanics. This is the reason why I would say that the Aeromancer actually as a class is one that enables you, and you should have the goal of playing very aggressively and trying to understand the boss's attack patterns and try to optimize how much you're hitting the boss at all times. So if you're looking for an experience where you can focus on dodging boss moves, dealing with mechanics, while also splitting your brain and dealing a lot of damage, I would say that the Aeromancer is a perfect fit for you. Personally, I'm playing the Wind Fury Aeromancer build, which focuses a lot on the swiftness stat, and this is also really helpful because not only will swiftness, increase your attack speed and your movement speed, but it's also going to give you better cooldowns, okay? So you can see on the screen there, it says attack speed, movement speed, and cooldown reduction is benefiting from the swiftness stat. And most importantly, of course, this refers to your skills. So for example, Downward Strike has a 7-second cooldown, but it's 5 seconds when I use it. My gems aren't applying, so it'll actually be lower in-game. Not only does it reduce the cooldown of your actual skills, one of the biggest things that you'll be finding is going to be useful in endgame and late game PvE is your spacebar dodge also has its cooldown reduced by swiftness. And this is really, really, really big. So not only are you moving faster, which allows you to get away and dodge things quicker just by moving around the map, but your spacebar dodge also is on a very short cooldown, allowing you to animation cancel, to get out of recovery of your skills quicker, to avoid attacks at the last second, at the last possible moment, so you can further improve your uptime. And then also, the biggest thing about the spacebar in late game PvE is there are situations where you can risk getting killed because you're going to get hit by an attack that puts you in some kind of crowd control. The spacebar dodge, for most intents and purposes, will defend you against any kind of crowd control. So as you get better in the game and you find yourself in a situation where you might get hit by some kind of CC, you have a better chance of avoiding that by using your spacebar because the cooldown is very low. And so the Aeromancer gets to use this very frequently. There's a good chance that you're going to have your spacebar up for exactly when you need it, exactly when you want it. So with that being said, I think the Aeromancer is going to be a really good choice again for players who are uptime focused and want speed and want the ability to avoid mechanics and to play very aggressively. Let's talk about very generally how the rotation feels, okay? The Aeromancer is a class where you're going to press a lot of buttons. You put your party synergy up, which in the case of the Aeromancer is a crit synergy, which gives basically your entire party more crit chance. The wording is going to be a little bit weird, but what you have to understand is it gives your party more crit chance. So you're trying to keep this up on the boss as much as you can. Then you have the system where you basically are going to use a skill that puts a shield up. And then you have a damage skill that if you have a shield up when you use a damage skill, then your damage skill will do more damage, okay? That's a very general overview. If you want to know more, refer to the community guide. But essentially what you're doing is you're just basically trying to keep all your skills on cooldown. Shield skill, damage skill. Shield skill, damage skill. Shield skill, damage skill. Shield skill, damage skill. And then in terms of a rotation, there's not really much that you have to worry about aside from the pacing of wanting to use a shield skill and then a damage skill. Always shield skill first, damage skill second. Shield skill first, damage skill second. And that's basically it. The rotation for Aeromancer is very, very lenient, which allows you to spend a lot more brain power on dodging mechanics and dodging moves. So this is basically all you have to worry about when you play the class. Again, overall, I would say that the Aeromancer is going to be one of the best classes that you're going to choose on a fresh account. If you don't have all your runes or whatever, you're going to run into mana issues if you play Wind Fury. I'm not sure about Drizzle, but definitely when you play Wind Fury, you're going to have mana issues early on. But that will be solved very quickly as you gain levels, as you get better runes and stuff like that. But highly recommend you play this class. It's going to be really, really useful for a lot of mechanics in the game. You're going to have all the tools you need to succeed. All right, next, let's talk about Arcana. This is a class, obviously, that is very near and dear to my heart. The Arcana is a class that I think is going to be fun for people who are looking for a specific kind of playstyle. If you're going to jump into the new server and play Arcana, there's a few things that I would caution you on. The first thing is that tripods are definitely very important for your output. So is having increased levels, but this kind of applies to all classes. I think the biggest thing is the interplay between how you want your build to work out and how you want to play your class. Again, refer to the community guide if you want to learn about all the different builds that are available to you. I'm not exactly sure how the runes will work out on the Jumpstart server, but you're probably going to be forced into playing raid captain type of builds for the Arcana initially. I'm not sure if you get the protection runes straight up, and some of the protection runes that you have to get, you have to do some kind of like horizontal content. We'll see. If you can get the protection runes, I definitely recommend that you go for barricade first. If you can't, then you're gonna have to probably do raid captain, but honestly, either build kind of works, especially if you're just filling out the class. The beauty of Arcana is that as you play the class more, you can kind of figure out what playstyle you want to go for and figure out what works best for you. Personally, I think that barricade is the way to go, but you can get very far using raid captain, you can get very far using barricade, it doesn't really matter. Now, that was in reference to Empress Arcana. Obviously, you can play Emperor Arcana as well, which I think is a very, very good choice too. Both class engravings for Arcana are going to be really, really good, but they're going to be a little bit different in nature. Let's talk about Empress Arcana a little bit. Empress Arcana as a class, well, actually, Empress Arcana in general as a class is one that is very dynamic. And the reason why I say that is because you have this card generation that you do, and each of the cards do different things. There's different resources out there for you to learn how to use these cards. The community guide has a few recommendations, but all you need to know is depending on which cards you draw, you don't really have any control over what kinds of cards you draw, except for when you get the clown card, which basically gives you a copy of the card that you last used. So this is the only one that you have any kind of like prediction for what you're actually going to get. But other than that, whichever card you get is random. And so depending on what card you get, you're going to need to adapt your playstyle just a little bit to accommodate for those things. If you're looking for a class that has like a high level of involvement, right, you're always going to need to be thinking a little bit about what you're doing. You're going to need to have good mastery and put into muscle memory some of these things so you don't have to spend so much brain energy thinking about it. In contrast to the Aeromancer, where I feel like you can spend a lot of energy thinking about the mechanics, thinking about avoiding the attacks that the boss is throwing at you. For the Arcana, your attention is going to be a lot more split. You can't just focus all on doing mechanics and dodging attacks, because you're going to have to think a little bit, and the better that you get, the more automatic it will become. You're going to have to think a little bit about what you're doing with your class itself, because a lot of effectiveness comes out of this. If you use some of these cards incorrectly, you lose a lot of your output. That being said, if I were to summarize the Arcana experience, it's fast-paced, low cooldown, high damage, okay? If these are the things that you're looking for, actually, I should add a fourth thing, actually. It's high execution, okay? So you're playing a fast-paced class with a lot of APM, low cooldown, you're high involvement, and you're doing a lot of damage, okay? Now let's go through the basics of how Arcana is played. Again, refer to the community guide if you want to look at specific builds and how you actually put your engravings down and tripods and gems and stuff. But the basic idea is that you build up stacks. So you see if I use the stacking skill, which are these blue colored skills, you can see that it puts these card icons on the boss. And basically, for most intents and purposes, in terms of doing damage, you're going to want to build your stacks up to 4 stacks. You see that it changes colors. Now there's 4 cards up here. And then you're going to want to use a ruin skill, which are these red colored skills on my bar. Okay? And when you use a ruin skill, you'll notice that when I have these stacks up and I use a ruin skill, I get a really big number there, okay? 18 million. If I just use my ruin skill without the stacks, I did 138,000, which is terrible, terrible, terrible damage. So you basically always want to stack up to 4 and then use an ability to consume the stacks and do big amounts of damage, okay? As you get more fluid with the rotation, you'll learn some nuances about how to play the class. So for example, when I get my relic set, I'm going to be using the Nightmare relic set, which again, you'll probably read more in a different resource. But basically, the Arcana wants to be pushing their mana bar down as much as they can. So you might do things like use abilities, right, without stacking them up because they're on cooldown to get yourself into this boundless MP state, which essentially improves my effectiveness with the class. And it's going to put you in a really good spot to do a lot of damage. So from this, you're going to understand that Arcana is a class that, like Aeromancer in some ways, you're going to want to have a lot of uptime. The difference is it's going to be a little bit more challenging because you're going to have to deal with your stacking and your ruin skills, plus the cards that you're drawing and surviving. Plus, you're going to have to deal with a lot of skills that, even though the mobility is nice with them, you have to use these skills that have mobility attached to them to do damage. So you're going to have to think about how the boss is attacking and where your skills are going to put you so that you don't dodge into an attack that's going to kill you, right? So say, for example, there's an attack that has an AoE that's close around the boss. If I use this skill to go in and I do that at the wrong time, I'm going to get hit by that ability. So you're going to need to understand when these things happen to use the Arcana effectively. In summary, the Arcana is going to be a very high output class. You're going to get really good results, but you need to put the work in, and the execution barrier is going to be quite high. A very rewarding class to play, and I would definitely recommend it for people who are looking for a lot of agency and a lot of output. Okay guys, let's talk about the Reaper. The Reaper is a class that I enjoy playing, and it's you may or may not have heard a lot about this class. One of the key things to understand about the Reaper is one, it's a back attack class, and two, you're really going to be concerned with uptime and survivability. And the reason why this is particularly notable for the Reaper class over some other classes that may be out there is that for the Reaper to succeed, you really want to uptime very hard. So this is more similar to the Aeromancer in the sense that you're trying to keep all your abilities on cooldown as much as you can. But one of the key things about playing Reaper is that when you use Shadow Vortex, it reduces the cooldown of your red skills, which this is going to be a big element of how frequently you can put out your damage. So let me demonstrate that. Say I use my Rage Spear. When I use my Shadow Vortex on my Q hotkey, you'll notice that Rage Spear's cooldown gets sped up. And this is essential to your success to playing Reaper. This is true for both the Lunar Reaper build and the Hunger Reaper build. Check the community guides. Now, with that being said, Reaper is a class that, sure, it's a back attack class, but you have the best options in the game to position yourself onto the rear of the boss, okay? If you're in front of the boss, you can get to the back of the boss by throwing Nightmare and then teleporting behind the boss, okay? That's your first option. If you're in front of the boss and you want to get behind the boss, you can use Distortion and just go through the boss and get to the back, okay? That's your second option. And then you have other options that involve using any number of your mobility to get there manually. You can also do it with your identity gauge by rolling. It's a terrible roll, but you get the idea. And so managing all these different mobility options to position yourself in the ideal spot to do maximum damage is going to be the name of the game for Reaper. Where a lot of the difficulty comes from for the Reaper is that you have a combination of the necessity to keep high uptime on the boss while managing all these different mobility skills to make sure you always end up at the right place at the right time. And you have to make sure that you're keeping good uptime, but not getting yourself into trouble and actually getting hit by attacks because you're quite squishy. If you were to play safe on the Reaper, that's all well and good. You actually have a lot of tools to play safe, okay? When I was talking about the Aeromancer, I mentioned how your spacebar gives you good super armor that prevents you from getting hit from a lot of CC. This is obviously true for all the other classes. When you use your spacebar, you're invulnerable to most amounts of CC. But for the Reaper, not many people know that when you use a teleport from Nightmare, the same is also true. On that specific teleport animation, you're also immune to all sorts of CC. And so sometimes you can chain these two things by using the teleport on Nightmare and the spacebar to make sure that you don't get hit by the crowd control that might kill you. On top of that, just generally staying safe and making sure you're not tanking attacks while keeping uptime and staying behind the boss is going to be critical for playing Reaper. So if I were to summarize this class, it's a class that wants a lot of uptime. You need to position and use your mobility very precisely. Precision is important on this class, as well as speed. And you're going to have a lot of mobility skills and interesting decisions with teleporting around the boss and moving around to make sure that you can get to the right spot that you want. A lot of agency. There's a lot of execution demand, not in your rotation. Your rotation is pretty simple, but just in managing the fight mechanics. Reaper recently got buffed as well, and so I actually think that their damage is pretty squarely in a very good place right now. It's a very good time to pick up the class. If you have synergy that increases your positional damage, so that's going to come from Deathblades or Gunlancers, I think you're going to find your Reaper to be really, really high output as long as you're able to keep your uptime steady. If you're looking for a very high execution class in terms of avoiding mechanics and using your mobility skills, the Reaper is a class for you. It's going to have the teleports, it's going to have the dashes, you're going to have interesting tools that you want to use in each of the fights. You're not going to do very well on things like stagger and weak point. That's going to be a little bit awkward for you. But other than that, this class is very, very speedy and has all the tools you need to get yourself to the spots that you want in a raid. Alright, well I just mentioned Deathblades as a positional synergy class. And Deathblade is going to be one of the better choices, in my opinion, for classes to pick. Right off the bat, if you're looking for a class that has high damage output, this is the class for you. If you're looking for a class that will be critical in empowering party members that rely on positional attacks, this is the class for you. The biggest thing about Deathblades is that in a party where you're using positional damagers, which is a core part of Lost Ark, I would say, this is one of the best classes to play in terms of synergy, as well as one of the best classes to play just in terms of raw output. Your damage numbers are going to be insane. Specifically, I'm talking about the Surge class engraving, as always. Check the community guide. But the key thing to know about Surge Deathblade is that you're really unlike any of the other classes I've talked about. You're not like the Aeromancer, you're not like the Arcana, you're not like the Reaper. All three of these classes are thinking about uptime, rolling their damage abilities as frequently as they can, making sure you're putting things on cooldown. For Surge Deathblade, that is true to a certain extent. It's true to every class to a certain extent. When you can do damage, you should be doing damage. But it is infinitely more important that you land one attack and one attack only on the rear. And that is going to be your Surge. So let me show you what that looks like. With Surge Deathblade, what you're doing is you pop your identity to go into a stance, and while you're in the stance, you're building up these stacks that you see here. You're going to build your stacks up to around 17 to 20 stacks. And when you do so, there's only one thing that matters now, and it's that when you press your identity button again, you're going to do a big slam. And when this slam happens, you're going to want to hit it on the rear of the boss, okay? And this is what it looks like. Now, when it doesn't crit, you're going to be really, really sad. But that still did a lot of damage for it not critting. This is all that Surge Deathblade is about. Now, there's some leniencies with it, because when you're building up your stacks, you have a lot of flexibility. I don't actually need to hit the boss in the rear with these skills to build up stacks. Now, ideally, when I use my Soul Absorber and my Blitz Rush, they do hit the rear of the boss. But by far, the most important thing for me to do in this stance is to make sure that I'm building up my stacks up to 17 to 20. And when I get to that point, I'm slamming the rear. Okay? This is the core element of Surge Deathblade. Now again, I cannot stress enough, if you're able to consistently build your stacks and slam the rear of the boss with your Surge, you're going to be doing a lot of damage. The complication comes in when you're actually doing fights. Now, one of the hardest things about Surge Deathblade is that in order for you to do your damage, you have to, at the very fastest, you have to have a 14-second lead time. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but you can maybe time it by the video. I'm going to pop my trance and try to build up 17 stacks as fast as I can. So that's the absolute fastest that you can get your stacks up. And the reason is because one thing to note about Surge is you build stacks off an internal cooldown, okay? So it doesn't matter if I'm overlapping all my attacks, okay? So say I put my wind cut down and I'm doing attacks on top of each other. This doesn't actually help me build stacks faster. I believe the internal cooldown for the stack building is like 0.4 seconds. So it's just about making sure you have something hitting the boss at all times, okay? You have something that's ticking the boss at all times. And as long as that's true, you're building your stacks as fast as possible. So that can be kind of nice in some senses, but like I mentioned, this means that you at least have to have something like a 14-second lead time before you actually are able to slam and get your big damage off. And this can get you into hot water because sometimes you pop your stance and you're building up your stacks, and right when you want to do your slam, right when you get to this point, say I'm right here, I'm right about to do my slam, and the boss leaves or does a mechanic or gets damage reduction or something happens that disallows me from getting the slam down. Now you'll notice that my trance actually lasts a good amount of time, so I can wait for the boss to drop back down. Let's say the boss comes back down now and I can finally slam, but sometimes you're not so fortunate. With that being said, playing Surge Deathblade demands that you have some kind of understanding for the pacing of the fight, okay? There's no way to cut it any differently. This is just something that you're gonna have to get used to playing Surge Deathblade. In summary, this class is definitely high execution. It's gonna test your ability to know how the boss moves, how the boss attacks, when the boss is gonna phase and do some crazy stuff, and a little bit of luck. There's a little bit of luck involved with it. But for the most part, it's on you as a player to decide how you're going to approach the fight. Deathblade has some very good tools like Dark Axle. Similar to Reaper, you can get to the rear spot of the boss, and this is very, very useful for landing your surges, and I definitely recommend that you try to focus on using Dark Axle either to live or to land your surge attacks on the rear. But again, high execution, very, 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 very high output, really good synergy, really, really good synergy, and there's a fourth bonus to playing Deathblade in that it's actually kind of cost efficient to play the class, in the sense that when you play on the Jumpstart servers, you're going to get a express support thing that's just going to give you 5 engravings for free, so you're not going to need to buy the accessories, which are typically going to be the most expensive part of playing the class, so you can kind of delay that and farm gold to get it at a time that's suitable for you. And then the only gem that you really, really need on Surge Deathblade is the Surge gem. That's the only thing that you need. So like one gem at like a really high level, and then the other gems can be like level 5, level 7. You can upgrade those at your own time, but you're gonna have a lot of efficiency out of getting just one damage gem. So that's what I would say the fourth benefit of playing Surge Deathblade is. In terms of a class that I can recommend, Surge Deathblade is very, very, very high on my list, guys. If you're at all interested in playing a high damage assassin type class, Surge Deathblade is definitely a recommendation from me. Okay guys, let's talk about Soulfist. Soulfist is a pretty unique class in the game in Lost Ark. I don't play much Energy Overflow, I play a lot of Robust Spirit, but both class engravings are going to give you very, very, very high output. Especially with the recent buff to the class, Soulfists are absolutely insane. The problem being is that Energy Overflow has a lot of technicalities to it. It's a very technical class, but if you're looking for a journey where you're going to try to learn how to execute on a class really well, much like Arcana, I would say Energy Overflow is one of the classes that's really going to scratch that itch for you, and for a very good reward. Now, Robust Spirit is a little bit simpler than Energy Overflow for sure. It has its intricacies as well, and there's some things that you want to learn about Robust Spirit Soulfist, but really the biggest reason why you would play Robust Spirit Soulfist, if you don't know already, is going to be very obvious, and it's that you can drop a nuke on your bosses, okay? This is the biggest reason to play Robust Spirit. It didn't crit. That is a reason to not play Robust Spirit Soulfist right there. Perfect example. I'm really glad that that happened in this example. That is... Okay. Usually we block that out of our memory. Whenever we don't crit our Spirit Bomb, we block that out of our memory. But you play Robust Spirit Soulfist to get big numbers, to do big damage, to feel really good about yourself, to get that dopamine rush. Let's talk a little bit more practically about Soulfist as a class. Now, one of the biggest difficulties about playing Robust Spirit Soulfist, if any of you have tried it in early game, is that when you don't have good specialization, you're gonna feel really, I can't stress this enough, Robust Spirit at low spec is really terrible, okay? It feels really, 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 really bad. But because the Jumpstart servers are going to give you your engraving support, this also means that you can equip accessories regardless of the engravings on them just for high stats and high quality. And so this actually isn't such a big problem if you're playing on the Jumpstart servers, okay? So I would aim to get as high specialization as you can. That's going to be really, really good if you're playing Robust Spirit Soulfist, okay? The other thing that I'm going to say is that, of course, for every class, tripods are important, okay? Tripods are super important for every class, but Soulfist specifically, you really, really, really want to make sure that your energy release has a max level tripod on ready attack, okay? This is super important because that's going to be all the attack power that you gain for your big scaling, for your big damage. You really, really want that, amongst a bunch of other tripods. Robust Spirit Soulfist is probably the most like how should I say? What's the word? It's the most, like, it demands the most specific amounts of gear and setup, okay? Your tripods have to be right so your rotation works out. Your gems have to be right so your rotation works out. Your stats have to be right so your rotation works out. It's nice because you get a very good sense of progression as you improve your gear, but it's also not that nice because when you're not at that point in your gear, it feels really clunky. But if I were to give a summary for how this class plays, you have excellent mobility. You can dash with your flash step skill up to 3 times. You have excellent damage because when you're in your angry mode, you just pump damage really hard. And then you have the best thing in the sense that you get one of the most satisfying skills of the game. When it crits, it's definitely gonna crit. It definitely crits this time, right? There we go, it crit. One of the most satisfying skills in the game that you can land. And so, if you're looking for a class that has really good burst windows, a really hard hitting skill, I'm pretty sure right now it's the hardest hitting skill in the game, especially after some of the changes that Lost Ark put into the game. This is the class for you. Gear dependent, setup is really important in the class. You better know your setup really well. And in terms of executing in fight, I actually think that Robust Spirit Soulfist, save for energy overflow, is kind of similar to Surge Deathblade in that you really need to know the phases of the fight, okay? If you try to throw your Spirit Bomb and the boss phases, you're going to feel really bad, okay? And so if you pop your hype meter and the boss jumps away, you're going to be really sad, okay? So in general, understanding the flow of the fight is going to be very similar to the Surge Deathblade, where you're going to really want to know the boss's moves, attack patterns, and phases. And so it's kind of a nerdy class. You kind of want to study up on your build, study up on your gear setup, and you also want to study up on the fight and the moves and the phases and stuff like that. That's going to really help you succeed on Soulfist. In terms of a class, I actually think Soulfist is one of the classes that you're gonna want to try it. It's definitely not for everybody. I'm gonna throw that out there. Personally, I don't think the Soulfist is a class for everybody. It can be a little bit awkward. It has really high output, but you really have to be that person. Okay, you have to be a specific kind of person to really enjoy Soulfist. Personally, I think it's really fun, especially because on the Jumpstart server, at least to my understanding, we're only gonna get the one pass. You might want to try this on live servers a little bit. It's hard to say, man. It's really hard to say, but if you think that this is something that you enjoy, knowing boss phases and mechanics and stuff so you don't kind of like throw your damage into the trash can, if you think this is your style of play, you definitely won't go wrong in the sense that it has very high output and it'll work for you in the end game. You definitely won't go wrong with that, okay? But I think for most people, this ends up becoming like a class that's for a specific audience, okay? So take that with a grain of salt. Personally, I think this class is great. Okay, let's talk about the last class in my 6-character roster that I really enjoy playing right now, and that is the Summoner, specifically the Master Summoner engraving for Summoner. You can also play Communication Overflow. Communication Overflow is the Swiftness version. Master Summoner is a spec version. I'm mostly going to talk about Master Summoner. The first thing to know about this class is, much like the Soulfist in some ways, personally, I feel like this class is very gear dependent, okay? So your setup is going to be very important. Like the Soulfist, a lot of your damage is going to come from this tripod that you have on Sticky Moss Swamp. You see Ready Attack there, level 5. It gives you attack power, 44%. Like the Soulfist, this is a lot of your attack power scaling. And then you have a second one that you also need that level 5 tripod on there. On top of that, you want tripods for things that give you meter building and stuff like that. So overall, I would say that Master Summoner, like Soulfist, is going to be a gear-dependent class. If you're fine with that, then it's going to be okay. But just know that part of the gameplay will be collecting that gear, which for some people, I think they enjoy. But I just wanted to throw that out there. Now, in terms of playstyle for Master Summoner is a bit strange, okay? I would say that this class excels in party play. You benefit a lot from a really good support, okay? If you have a friend that you're playing with that is playing support, there is a lot that they can do for you that will enhance your ability to just excel in fights. The one thing that I will say is that Master Summoner's mobility is really, really poor. Okay? I can't stress this enough. This isn't just limited to the fact that because you don't build a ton of swiftness, your movement speed is generally like not the greatest. Your spacebar also has, you notice that there's a little delay in the animation. There's a little hang up after you spacebar, okay? So that sucks. The cooldown on your spacebar is really long. And then outside of walking around and using your spacebar dash, those are the only mobility skills that you have, okay? So you're gonna need to know positioning really, really, really well to make sure you don't just straight up die. That's one of the biggest things about Summoner. Now, the reason why I say having a good support is really helpful is not only because it's going to improve your damage output by a significant amount, but having shields at the right time is going to be specifically very good for Summoner, because even though your mobility is really bad, one of the nice things about playing Master Summoner is you're frequently using your identity skill. And when you're using your identity skill, you get a level of super armor that keeps you from getting knocked off your feet. Specifically, that's called push in Lost Ark. And you'll probably learn more about your CC immunities, or you can watch a different video to learn specifically about those things. But just know that a significant majority of the CC that is put out against players in PvE is going to be push. And when you use your identity skill, you get push immunity. So you're going to have a lot of opportunities to get uptime by tanking boss moves using push immunity. However, the problem with this is that you're still taking the damage, but if you have a really, really good support that's really good at shielding you at moments and you're coordinating really well with them, you actually have the opportunity to protect yourself while you're using these skills, okay? So not only for coordinating damage buffs for when you do big damage, but also for protecting you when you're looking to tank. And this is going to be really, really important because despite the fact that you're a specialization class on Master Summoner, uptime is really important. You're trying to cycle your meter generation frequently to constantly build up your meter to drop your big damage for your identity. You're trying to do this all the time, all the time, all the time. And as you'll notice, your big damage, a cure, has a really long cast time, okay? I press a cure and I aim it in this specific spot. I better hope that the boss stays in this spot for the entirety of the animation. And so sometimes the only way you can do that is to use it right when the boss uses a move, which would involve tanking the hit that comes after. And so you'll start to understand that when you play Master Summoner a lot, it's important to know which skills that I can push immunity and not get knocked over for or CC'd. So using the identity right when the boss uses an attack, and then having the shield to make sure that you can actually withstand the attack and not lose too much. This is going to be an important part of Summoner gameplay. So not only is positioning important, boss knowledge is important, coordinating with your support is important. I think this is part of what makes playing Master Summoner really fun, is that there's a lot of things that you have to pay attention to and prep correctly to play the class optimally. The other thing that I will say about Master Summoner that is really, really fun about playing this class is that you are not lacking for utility, okay? The only thing that is questionable is your counter, which is okay. The slow counter is kind of made up for in the sense that it has a little bit more range than most, but to be honest, your counter is not that great. But for everything else, for your stagger, excellent. Your stagger is super good. For your weak point, excellent. Your weak point is super good, bar none. It's probably the best weak point in the game that you have. Summoner has all the utility that you could want, and in terms of damage output, Summoner is definitely up there as one of the best. The damage output for Summoner, especially if you're coordinating with your supports, is insane. And so all those things put together, if I were to give a summary for Summoner as a class, gear dependent, so you're going to go on a journey on your vertical progression and your horizontal progression, all this stuff is important, and setting up your class is going to be, setting your character up appropriately is going to be super important. It demands a lot out of you. Your positioning, very important. Your knowledge of boss attack patterns, very important. Coordinating with your support, very important. Number 3 is you're definitely not a fast-paced class, but you demand uptime, okay? So this is definitely not like Aeromancer, definitely not like Reaper, right? Where they have speed, they have mobility, they have low cooldowns, they're cycling their skills really, really fast. Summoner is about uptime and precision, but you don't have a lot of that speed. But in terms of damage output, you are really, really good. You get a lot of good damage out there. And in terms of utility, really, really good. Stagger and weak point are never an issue if you play your class appropriately on Summoner. Personally, Summoner is definitely one of my favorite classes to play, but it's a little bit costly. It's a little bit gear dependent, right? It's going to take, if you're playing this class as a main, I think you won't have an issue, but you definitely have to work for it, okay? I really enjoy this class. I think you get a lot of agency out of it. Yeah, it's a great class. So that's about it with my summary. It's really exciting. The Jumpstart servers are going to be a really fun way to get back into the game if you dropped it before, or if you haven't tried Lost Ark before, give the Jumpstart server a try. Let me know if these class overviews were interesting or helpful, or if there was something that you would have wanted to know about the classes instead, or if there's a class that you wanted me to talk more about a little bit more in depth. Obviously, for me, it's really, really fun when new players join the game. That makes the experience a lot more fun for me. And it lets me make more content just talking about just casually how to enjoy the game, which is how I enjoy the game, especially nowadays. I think it's the best way to play Lost Ark. So hopefully some of the any one of these 6 classes I talked about interests you. If not, let me know what you think about the Jumpstart servers. What are you going to be playing? And what are you looking forward to? I'd love to know. Leave a comment below. I read all of them. So I hope you guys have a lot of fun. And I'll see you on the Jumpstart servers.